Thank you for starting off your week with CNN Student News. I'm Carl Azus. First up, international aviation officials are trying to figure out what caused a tragic plane crash in Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. Kogali Mabia Flight 9268 crashed on Saturday morning, killing all 224 people aboard. It was traveling from the Egyptian resort city of Sharm el-Sheikh to the Russian city of St. Petersburg. Many of those aboard were Russians coming home from vacation. Russian President Vladimir Putin declared yesterday a national day of mourning. The plane went down in clear weather a little more than 20 minutes after takeoff. A Russian official reportedly said it broke up in midair. The area where it crashed is home to Islamic militant fighters who are associated with ISIS terrorists. But though they made a statement that appeared to claim responsibility, Russian and Egyptian officials say that's unlikely. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi says the investigation could take months. Moving to the Middle Eastern nation of Syria now, where the U.S. is escalating its fight against the ISIS terrorist group. President Obama announced Friday that a small number of American troops would be deployed to northern Syria to help different groups there battle ISIS. He authorized fewer than 50 special operations forces to go, but a U.S. official says more could be sent later on. The White House believes that the additional U.S. troops will be effective in helping weaken ISIS. But it's a significant change in plan for the Obama administration, which said last year that no U.S. troops would be involved in direct combat with ISIS. Democrats and Republicans are calling for the president to lay out a clear strategy for dealing with the terrorists. Some are concerned about mission creep when an initial military goal gradually expands. As part of its ongoing air campaign in Syria, the U.S. military has used drones, unmanned aircraft, for both surveillance and attack missions. At the consumer level, they've given users bird's-eye views of, well, anything. Once again, they're expected to be a popular Christmas gift this year, something that retailers and the Federal Aviation Administration are watching.
They've breached some of the most secure airspace in the United States, including the White House. And they've nearly collided with commercial planes, even medical choppers en route to emergencies.
Tower, medevac H1. We almost got hit by a drone, just to let you know, up here.
In most cases, authorities get the drone, but not the operator. Federal safety regulators hope that's about to change.
We're going to require operators of drones to register their aircraft.
The FAA hopes to force consumers to provide personal information when they buy a drone, so it can be tracked back to the owner.
I think many, if not most, users will comply because there are penalties associated with using these devices in the national airspace without complying with the registration requirement.
The FAA says this year pilots report around 100 drone sightings every month. With nearly 1,000 drone sightings so far this year, the number of reports has nearly quadrupled since 2014.
But key questions remain about what personal information consumers will have to provide and how regulators will enforce this. Renee Marsh, CNN, Washington.
Today's roll call begins in West Africa. We're taking you to the nation of Senegal. In the capital city of Dakar, we're happy to be part of your day at the International School of Dakar. Thank you for watching. Next, we're headed to the city of Osceola in southern Iowa. Hello to the Indians. Clark High School is on the roll. And finally, to eastern Missouri, we're visiting the city of Ellisville and shouting out the Trojans of Crestview Middle School. Great to see you. Starting later this month, the French government is planning to host its largest conference ever. 40,000 delegates representing 195 countries, including China, India, and the U.S. Those three nations produce the largest amounts of carbon dioxide, which most scientists say is causing Earth's average temperatures to heat up. A smaller group disagrees, saying climate change happens naturally and the Earth can absorb the CO2 from human activities. But that won't be the focus of COP21.
So you may have seen this term COP21 popping up in your Twitter feed. COP21 means the Conference of Parties. It's the 21st time, essentially, that the world has come together to try to figure out a solution to climate change. This is something that we've never succeeded at before, but there's very good reason to think that this year in December in Paris, when the world meets again, that we'll be able to figure out something that will get us on the right track. When all these world leaders get together in Paris, they're basically going to be talking about one number. and that number is 2 degrees Celsius. That's the threshold for warming. It's measured since the start of the Industrial Revolution. And if we cross that mark, we're expected to go into what policy wonks consider the danger zone, or dangerous territory for climate change. There are entire countries that could disappear because of sea level rise at that mark. Wildfires are expected to get bigger, droughts will get more severe, and 30% of animals will be put at risk for extinction. I've seen these talks described as basically a potluck dinner, and each country in the world is bringing its dish, its climate plan to the table and saying, okay, here's what my plan is, like, what are you bringing? And the fact that the US and China are both bringing dishes to this giant international potluck is a huge deal for the Paris climate talks. That really hasn't happened before. China and the US are the 2 biggest climate polluters in the world, and previously they sort of stalled or gave mixed messages in terms of what they were going to do to get off of fossil fuels. There are huge stakes to these talks, but as far as what's going to be happening in Paris, it may be a lot of really kind of smaller things. Countries will be fighting about how aggressive these cuts to fossil fuels are, exactly who's going to pay for countries to adapt to climate change, and how often these goals are going to be reviewed going forward.
In the U.S., doctors perform almost 1 million bone graft surgeries every year. Most of the time, they harvest a piece of bone from a patient or a deceased donor, set it where it needs to go, and hope it takes hold. But what if there were a way to regenerate bone from someone's own cells?
The 206 bones that make up our skeletons give our body strength and structure. There are no extra pieces. That may be why bone is the most transplanted body part. Worldwide, millions of bone transplant procedures are conducted each year, costing billions, and it doesn't always work.
Quite literally, the only way to get human bone, even now, is to cut it out of a human. What we proposed is to say, take the best thing, which is your own bone, but instead of cutting you apart to get it, is to grow your own bone in the lab.
In very simple terms, you'll need a 3D printer, some fat, a cow bone, and an incubator. A CT scan gets the measurements of a patient's bone. A mold is made from a cow bone stripped of all DNA, and then a custom-made petri dish called a bioreactor is 3D printed. The lab extracts stem cells from a patient's fat and turns them into bone cells, which are put on the mold and plugged into the bioreactor. Patients suffering from cancer, trauma, or congenital defects won't need to worry about transplanted bones getting infected or bodies rejecting them, because the bones would be derived from their own cells. So far, they've only tested the transplants in pigs, but if they can start human clinical trials, Tandon says they're just 8 years from market.
At what point then would you implant this bone into a human?
We're hoping to be able to start clinical trials in the next couple years.
Will we ever see a day where you can grow an entire limb?
It's a very exciting day. A lot of people will have to work together to make that happen, because you'd have to grow muscle, skin, nerve, bone.
Growing limbs may be far off, but bones are where it all begins.
It's really interesting to be seeing it happening in front of our very eyes right now.
Forget carving pumpkins, pumpkin seeds, or pumpkin pie. In Chagrin Falls, Ohio, high school students have a Halloween tradition of rolling them. First, they haul more than 200 pumpkins to the top of a large hill. Then they smash and roll them down the hill. Finally, the real fun begins. The pumpkin pieces are slippery, so the spirited students swiftly slide on sleds, giving in to gravity and gourd-hearted fun. Before we hit the road, jack-o'-lantern, a question stems from all this. Who cleans it up? A front-end loader scoops up the scraps and does a fine job, and the students scrape together their own money to cover the expense and plant the seeds of goodwill. I'm Carl Azus for CNN Student News.